Okay, so we're back, and I've just started with, we're in the PowerPoint, and this is Introduction to Public Speaking. We're in part 2. We're going to finish up this lecture right now, and we're going to be looking at both powerful speakers of the past and the present, but here's just some pictures of powerful speakers of the past that you recognize, and I want you to think about for a minute, what makes these powerful speakers? Or why do we consider these speakers, or all speakers, powerful? What is it that they did? Now, granted, each one of them, I'm going to go over each one of them. You know who this is, Abraham Lincoln. This is Malcolm X. Sojourner Truth, her name's right there. Ida B. Wells. Frederick Douglass. This is a suffragist from, let's go back. Sorry about that. A suffragist from the women's movement. We're talking about suffragist and women's right to vote. Long time ago. And of course, you all are familiar with Martin Luther King. Okay? Last but certainly not least in any way. All of these people as speakers, and of course they're all speakers that are from this country. Okay, they were born here, or were from this country, and had powerful ability to do what? To change things. They use their voice to change things. That's what they all have in common. Now, given they responded to a time, there was a time needing for change in our society. They responded to that, but they used their voice to change things. And they are known. You know, Abraham Lincoln, how many of you had to memorize his speech, 7 years ago, or however that speech begins? There's a famous speech by him, right? The I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King. That speech, when we look at persuasive speaking, I have a portion of that speech in that particular lecture. That speech isn't even called I Have a Dream, but we refer to it as I Have a Dream. Why? Because he says, I have a dream over and over again. We remember that. These are called strategies of what speakers use to help you remember their speech and to get the message across. So, powerful speakers of the present. Now, I've included these people because they've made a difference. This is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez right here in the corner. She is a woman who's highly outspoken about changing environmental laws. She's highly outspoken about social justice, and she's young. She's a little bit older than you guys, and she's young, and she's has a very interesting story. And Elizabeth Warren, another outspoken female. Notice how there are a lot of women here that are shown, that are becoming, women's voices are becoming more powerful in our society, which is beautiful because it evens things out, right? And people of color, of all colors, are becoming more visible. And so, President Obama, the First Lady, Michelle Obama, and this is Emma Gonzalez. She was the young woman who spoke out of the Parkland shootings in Florida when that happened, and really started a movement in terms of really looking at, do we need automatic weapons in gun laws, and what is the gun law debate about? And she really started that. Now, I'm not sure that I think that she's continued it, but she definitely and we'll go back to the ethos part, right? She had credibility because she was there and experienced it. So this is just some of the powerful speakers. There are more than this, but I mostly stuck to people in a political capacity, because that's generally how, when we think of public speaking, we think of them in a political capacity. But there are definitely more than just these folks. Okay. Let's get an idea of how public speaking is different than other forms of communication, so you can really get a handle on what public speaking is. So public speaking is not communication between two people. Okay, that's called dyadic communication, or if you've studied interpersonal communication, communication between this person and this person is basically what we call interpersonal communication. Okay, that's not public speaking. Public speaking is not small group communication. Small group communication is generally limited to between 3 and 7 people. A small group communication, if you decide to take that class, if you've taken that class, it's the idea that you can sit in a group and you're able to converse with each person. That's why it's limited to about 7 people. Once you get beyond that amount, then you can't really converse individually with those people. And it's not mass communication. So we live in a mass communication society, and it's hard to distinguish, but ideally what public speaking is when I can go somewhere and I can hear you speak and I'm within an audience. The speaker has to be able to interact, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, has to be interact with your audience. You can't interact with your audience in a mass communication situation, right? If you're watching a speech, if you're watching the president give a speech from the Oval Office that's televised and we're seeing it in our living rooms, that's mass communication. That's not a public speech. Now, if he's giving a speech at a rally, that's a public speech. Okay, see the difference? We have to be able to see and interact. The audience has to be able to see and interact and have communication with the speaker in some form, whether it's applause, whether it's hissing, whether it's just like the speaker can see the faces of the people. Okay, it occurs when speaker delivers a message to the audience that is present. So the audience has to be present when the speaker delivers a speech. The speaker can verbally or non-verbally interact with their audience, whether they can move through the audience, they have mobility in the audience, whether they can look at people and call them out. But they have to be able to verbally and non-verbally, they can see faces, right? Unfortunately, you're not, I can't even show you this in class, because normally what I would do is I'd show you in class as I'm lecturing that I take the time to look at every one of your faces as I'm talking, right? I try to pan the room. In a public speaking situation, that's what you want to do, is you want to pan your audience. You want to try to make eye contact with everyone, not just to acknowledge their existence, which is part of it, but it's also you're taking their temperature. You're seeing, am I making sense? Are they getting, you can tell by the looks on people's faces. Am I reaching them? Am I making sense to them? A speaker always has to have a reason and purpose. No one goes out and gives a public speech without a reason behind it. Okay, there's a purpose for it. They're trying to get social justice reform. They're trying to think about the processing that's gone on, that this huge wave of protesting across the country in response to George Floyd, right? What has happened. And out of that, I haven't seen I've seen some of them. Actually, one of the speeches is actually going to be on part of your speech analysis. But I'm sure major speeches have come out. Actually, I have seen some major speeches, great speeches have come out of this that's happened to really like wake people up to the need for police reform and the need for social justice around African American communities and racism. And I could spend days talking about that. Okay. And white supremacy and white privilege. So ideally, in a public speech situation, the speaker gives a speech without interruption. It means this is not a dialogue. A speech means I talk, you listen. Remember the transmission model? This is the only place where that might work, that idea, because a speaker is there to deliver a speech from beginning to end. It's not a dialogue. If speaker doesn't start talking, then take questions from the audience, that's not a speech. A speech is they have prepared a speech and they deliver it from beginning to end. And when I say take responsibility for your ideas, it means you're responsible for what you say. All of you are. The speeches that you're going to give in this class, you are responsible for how you say it, what you say, your facts. This is very important. The research you do, taking responsibility for the research you do in citing people when appropriate. and giving facts that are true. You're responsible for all of that. If you want us to trust you as a speaker, you need to take full responsibility for your ideas, your beliefs, and your attitudes. All right. I want you to look at this a little bit. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is a little model that I pulled from the net. I wish I had a better model because it's not very clear. But those two things, like think of them like as eyeballs, as two people. I usually draw this on the in the classroom. I'll draw like two people talking. But basically, you've got a sender and receiver in this transactional model of communication. You have a sender and receiver. So the sender is here and the receiver is here. The sender sends a message to the receiver. The receiver lets the sender know they got that message through feedback. Okay? So sender sends a message to receiver. Receiver lets the sender know that through feedback. The sender and receiver can take turns being sender and receiver. Okay, these are actually sender, receiver, message, feedback are part of this communication, the terms of this communication model. Now what happens is that when the sender sends a message to the receiver, they do this thing called encoding the message. Just like what I do in a lecture, is I try to put it in language that you'll understand. Now, if my audience was an audience of academics who were communication scholars, the language I would use would be a little different, right? It would be different words that they would be familiar with. But I try to encode my message like a speaker would encode their message depending on who they're talking to. So it's how they create that message and shape that message so the receiver can receive that message. Got it? So when the receiver gets the message, they do this thing called decoding. Okay, right here, where are the words? Decodes, responds, decodes. Well, let's just look at that. So the sender's doing this, they're encoding the message, and the receiver decodes. It means they figure out, what does that message mean? Based upon how the sender sent it. And then they give feedback. And on it goes. It's happening. Okay? Just think about this for a minute of how that's working. Okay. Now, what could happen is, I want you to think about how many times you've talked to someone, if there's loud noises around, or you're in a quiet space and you can't talk loud, and so you're whispering, and the person's like, thought they heard you, but they didn't hear you. Okay, but really more, it's like, or it could be noise. I like to use noise. The word noise is anything that interrupts your ability to communicate. So that last example I gave you of you have to whisper, you can't talk loud because you're in an environment, those are the constrictions of the environment are keeping you from communicating in a way that can be heard. That could actually be considered noise. So noise is a word, a term, but think of it, it can be literal noise, it can be internal noise. So while you're listening to this lecture, how many times do you space out? Right? You might have spaced out and started thinking about something else. That's noise, right? Noise can be your thoughts. Maybe you're listening to this lecture and you're hungry. Your body, or you're not feeling well. Your body can be something that creates an obstacle to your ability to hear. Okay, so noise is that obstacle. What you want to be cognizant in communication is that can happen anytime. Right? It can happen anytime. That's why when I talked about communication, what is communication and why it's so messy, and it's this transactional thing happening at the same time. It's amazing when you break it down this way that we are able to communicate at all, that we get each other, right? But so in that, let's look at all these places. So we got the source, encoding, receiver. So source and sender are the same thing. Receiver decodes, they get feedback. The message comes from that sender or source. And the channel is in which that message is sent and the feedback is sent, the channel. So the channel right now for you is this video. That's the channel of which you're getting this message. And that channel happens within what we call, the channel happens within an environment, okay, the situation. The environment is, we're actually in two different environments. I'm in my little office here space, and you're wherever you are where you're receiving this video, okay? And what we're after, remember, this is what we're after always, is shared meaning. So in all this happening, we're after understanding each other. So if we don't understand each other, we might have to do this back and forth, right? I say this is what this means. You're listening to me and you go, but Ms. Brennan, I don't understand. Can you explain this part again? That's you letting me know I'm not getting what you're saying. So then I say, okay, what part aren't you understanding? You say, I don't understand this part. I say, okay, let me try to explain it a different way, or give you a different example, right? And then we have that conversation. So that's when we're talking about from that model. But even in public speaking, looking at public speaking as this interactive process, is you're interacting with your audience, right? You're interacting with your audience all the time. You're having eye contact with them. You're watching their facial expressions, their energy. You're reading them. And if you're a good speaker, you make your adjustments to your speech and yourself, your energy of yourself, in order to keep your, if your goal is shared meaning, then you need to keep your audience engaged. There's my cat again. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to analyze the audience. Then we're going to select a topic. I'm actually going to go back. Let's go back. And we're going to, for the sake of making sure that this video, we're going to stop here, and then I'm going to finish up on the other part. We'll be right back.